Good morning. So my refutation is going to be on an argument that was given to us by Felicia Gutierrez, and the topic was GMOs. Her claims, first, was that GMO crops cut down the cost of preparing any specific crop to be ready for harvest. Claim 2 was that GMOs expanded the available arable land, and claim 3 was that GMOs will increase the nutritional value of healthy food. So as for claim 1, the cost of the crops will be reduced. The quote that she used was that the gene that's put into soybeans to make it resistant to Roundup Ready would only require one application of weed killer instead of multiple applications, reducing production costs and limiting the dangers of agricultural waste runoff. So she talked about Roundup Ready crops. So let's talk about Roundup Ready crops. What they are, they're crops that have had a gene added to them, GMOs, to make them resistant to Roundup, which is a common herbicide that they use. So initially, yes, they use less. However, because the farmers are now able to use this herbicide in order to prepare their crops, what they're not doing is they're not tilling their farms, which is normally what they would use to eliminate the excess food waste. And what that's doing is it's allowing the weeds, whom have some genetic mutation that allow them to survive this first initial herbicide spray, to survive and then spread, potentially creating super weeds. These new super weeds can spread and they require more heavy use of the poison. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture claims that an additional 383 million pounds of herbicide have been used than if they hadn't introduced the GMOs initially. So claim 2, that it would make it possible to farm GMOs in places that wouldn't be able to normally grow these arid lands. So let's take Africa, for example. It's an arid location, and it would be perfect for something like this, right? So it'd be more so maybe if you could convince the locals. You see, African farmers and civil society have repeatedly rejected these GM crops and has even suggested banning. And the reason being is, though these GMO crops might potentially be more, it might be cheaper and lower the costs for farmers in large scales, these farms that are typically smaller farms, they can't risk using these GMO crops. They could potentially not produce a good stock for them. And they could go bankrupt potentially. And what that would mean is the people who are in the local lands that they typically would rely on those farmers don't have the crops anymore and potentially die out. And those farmers have found that the indigenous crops that have already been potentially perfected and breeded to make it best for that environment are the ones that are safer to use because they've reliably produced crop yield. So the claim 3 is potentially the healthier crops, the more nutritious one, right? So what these new crops introduce means is they're new plants. People are developing more allergies to them, if that makes sense. They're not used to them. For example, the UK, after GMO soy was introduced, soy allergies were increased by 50%. And you can even be allergic to these GMO soys and not allergic to standard soy. Surprise, you're allergic. As opposed to using pre-existing plants that people are already attuned to, used to, and their bodies are used to as well. So in conclusion, GMOs, she raises good points, potentially in the future. However, more studies and research and perfecting is needed in this. And honestly, we shouldn't be forcing these potentially harmful crops onto people who aren't absolutely willing nor fully educated on it. Yeah, everybody should be.
Just kidding.
You ever heard the term of a forced knee?
Yeah.
My mom keeps saying that.
I didn't
Is it
mention
freaking you out?
Oh.
Like every single time I talk to you, we would put her up every single day.
Coughing on you.
No, I'm not.
That's why
They might GMOs
Yeah, he was
on the and then they shot them.
Conspiracy.
That's why the Logan's going on.
It's going away.
It's also added on.
It's going away because I'm passing it everywhere.
When I first met you, you coughed. No. Alright, well, I have a doctor's appointment.
All right, Devon, I want to start with the good stuff because I think that you have a good way of talking to the audience and explaining things. I think that you are convincing and clear when you make arguments. So there's not a problem with your delivery or your explanations. The problem is there's not any evidence on this. The proof is all asserted, and you need to be more specific in arguing the information that the advocate presented too. So, like on your first point, when you talked about the decrease in costs and whether or not that's true, you've got this claim about, well, they're not tilling, and so it allows super weeds. And I'm like, well, where's the evidence on that? And that's all asserted. And then we've got the best piece of information that you do have a source for is that we've had increased use of pesticides according to the USDA. So that's an argument that seems to suggest, look, we've had these GMO products for a period of time, and look what's happened. That's the way I think that argument needs to be developed. The other stuff, if you're going to make the argument on it, give us some proof on it. Tell us who said this, what information do we have that confirms it. I'm sure that you've read it someplace. I don't think you just made this up whole cloth out of your imagination, but it's not being cited in the presentation, and that's a little bit of a problem. On the arable lands issue, the same sort of thing. I think you make some reasonable assertions and interesting ideas here. Maybe there are cultural barriers that are going on. People have traditions in the way they do things. But that seems like it's kind of a smokescreen because there's no information that says that this is the case. And they're worried about going bankrupt. They're afraid that the crops won't come up. Says who? I don't know why you believe that this is true. I'm not saying that it isn't true. But I'm saying I have no reason to believe that it's true except that you are saying that this is the case. And although I think that you sound like you're credible when you're talking about this, I'm thinking, well, this is a pretty strong claim to be making, that the indigenous crops are safer for people to use. Well, why would they believe that that's true? Why is that true? What information do we have that that's true? I don't know. And then the last point on the soy allergies, you do cite a statistic that says that there's been an increase in the number of soy allergies and come from any kind of thing. The source was a little bit vague on that, but I could tell that there was some information there. I think we're on the right track there, but that is underdeveloped. There's just that's all you've got on that particular point. What we don't get much discussion of is any of the advocates' information and reasoning. So, for example, on their nutritional point, well, what proof did they use to suggest that there was going to be some advantage here? Did the example that they cite, is that a realistic one? Is it important? Is it generalizable to these other populations? Particularly, for instance, some of the places that are mentioned, if we're increasing arable lands in different parts of the world and they're going to be able to grow these foods that supposedly have greater nutritional value than the domestic ones do, well, what kind of proof did the advocate offer on those kinds of things? I think you need to be a little bit more aggressive in talking about the argument that the other side made too. I don't want to say, it's a little odd to say, you sound like you've got the right kinds of answers that you would make in a debate if you didn't have any evidence and you're getting up and making an argument. Those are good arguments to make. But you had a couple of weeks to get ready, and it seems like it's just a little underdeveloped, and I'm going, it needs to be better than that, all right? So I think you're capable of doing what you're supposed to be doing here, not quite there yet, all right? That's the way I'd put it. Thank you.